Hello, AP Environmental Science students. In today's screencast, we're going to continue to talk about Chapter 1, which is Environmental Problems, Their Causes, and Sustainability. All of today's notes are based on Living in the Environment, the 16th edition by Miller and Spoolman. Chapter 1.5 specifically looks at why we have environmental problems. This is a fairly long chapter, and these are going to be themes that we see come over and over again as we go through this class. So the first major point we're going to look at in this section is that major causes of environmental problems are population growth, wasteful and unsustainable resource use, poverty, exclusion of environmental costs from resource use, from the market price of goods and services, and attempts to manage nature with insufficient knowledge. Also, people with different environmental worldviews often disagree about the seriousness of environmental problems and what we should do about them. So, as previously stated on the last slide, our 5 basic causes of environmental problems are 1. Population growth, 2. Unsustainable resource use, 3. Poverty, 4. That prices do not include the value of natural capital, 5. The fact that we try to manage nature without knowing enough about it. So the first major cause is population growth. The specifics on this slide are actually from the case study at the beginning of Chapter 1, so you can go back and read that if this was not something you got from the chapter. Human population is experiencing exponential growth, which means it's going up very quickly. Right now we're at about 7 billion people and counting. This has meant that the demand for resources is exploding. We need more food, water, raw materials, and energy than ever. As we demand more resources and create more products, we produce huge amounts of pollution and waste that we don't know what to do with. So the major question that a lot of scientists are asking themselves is, how many people can our planet support? Well, really this is unknown, but there's a lot of disturbing signs that we're nearing that capacity. We're burning too many fossil fuels, we're cutting down too many forests, and we're getting to the point that a lot of these things could be irreversible. But luckily, we have some solutions to these problems, so all of it is not bad. Another reason for environmental problems is unsustainable resource use. The lifestyles of many affluent consumers are built upon high levels of consumption and unnecessary resource use. So therefore, we're using resources beyond their sustainable yield, which again, remember, is the rate at which we can use resources as they're replenished. So we're using them beyond that yield, which is leading to rapid environmental degradation. Affluence isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes the more affluent a culture is, or people is, they can provide funding for developing technologies to reduce pollution, to reduce that environmental degradation, and to reduce waste. Poverty is the third reason for environmental problems. Poverty occurs when people are unable to meet their basic needs for adequate food, water, shelter, health, and education. Basically, they're desperate for short-term survival. Impoverished people will deplete and degrade forests, soil, grassland, fishery, and wildlife to get what they need. Poverty also affects population growth. The more impoverished a country is, the higher the population generally goes up, because impoverished people depend on their children to help them meet their basic needs. For example, the more children they have, the more people they have to go out and gather food, or hunt, or get water, or take care of animals on their farm, those kind of things. Poverty also often leads to malnutrition, which is a lack of protein and other nutrients needed for good health. Those who live in impoverished areas also usually have limited access to adequate sanitation facilities and clean water. And because they usually use wood or coal burning stoves, they breathe in some heavily polluted air. So all of these things together increase chances of premature death, whether it's getting diarrhea from unclean water, or measles, or respiratory issues. Premature death is much higher in impoverished areas. So this figure is right out of your book. This shows the percent of the world's population that has lack of access to the following things. So if you look at this, it's quite startling. Over 2.6 billion people don't have access to adequate sanitation facilities. 2 billion people don't have electricity. 2 billion people don't have enough fuel for heating and cooking, and so on. If you look down, again, it's fairly staggering. The fourth reason for environmental problems is the fact that prices don't include the value of natural capital. So companies don't have to pay for the environmental cost of a resource use. For example, timber companies pay the cost of cutting down trees, so they need the equipment, they need the construction permits or whatever, but not the resulting environmental degradation and loss of habitat. So because they chop down trees, they don't have to go back and plant more, so there's still a big enough habitat for the animals. All they have to do is actually pay for the cost of cutting them down. So as a result, when the consumers pay for goods, they don't include the harmful environmental costs, because why would companies that aren't paying for the environmental cost themselves charge their consumers? They want to keep the price down so people buy it. So that in that way, consumers are unaware or have no way to evaluate how harmful a company is on the environment. Furthermore, companies receive tax breaks and payments called subsidies to assist them in using resources to run their company. The government wants to stimulate the economy and make sure there are jobs, but it doesn't take into account the degradation of natural capital. So they're giving them these tax breaks even though they're still chopping down those trees. Finally, we are trying to manage nature without knowing enough about it. We all have different views on the seriousness of environmental problems due to our worldviews. Worldviews shape our answers to ethical environmental questions. The worldviews, again, were planetary management, stewardship, and environmental wisdom, and those we covered in Chapter 25. Additionally, poverty-stricken areas are generally uneducated about long-term effects on some of the stuff that they're actually doing to their environment. So people in impoverished areas might be farming and taking all of the nutrients out of the soil, where basically it turns into desert after a while, and then again they still have issues getting their food. So nobody's educating them about proper farming techniques, so they lead to increased environmental degradation. We can learn to make informed environmental decisions by following the steps outlined in this figure. So steps like identifying the problem, gathering information, propose a solution, projecting short and long-term environmental and economic advantages and disadvantages, deciding on and implementing a solution, evaluating the consequences, and revising as needed. Also, when you're making these decisions, we have to consider human values. So is it ethical? How much will it cost? What are the short and long-term benefits and consequences? So things, not only how will this affect the environment, but how will it affect humans as a species? When we work together to solve environmental problems, we have to make a conscious effort to build social capital. And in order to get to that sustainable society, we have to actually get people with different views and values to talk and listen to one another, to find common ground based on understanding and trust, and work together to solve these problems. Generally, this requires some trade-off solutions or compromises, where maybe this time the environment gets the benefit and our economy loses. Or the next time it's flip-flopped. We have to weigh the pros and cons. Social capital. Building social capital encourages openness, communication, cooperation, and hope, while it discourages closed-mindedness, polarization, confrontation, and fear.